In the evening, I went with Duckery, my guide, the only tolerable person I have seen in this country, to visit the glacier of Boysen. This glacier, like that of Montenvert, comes close to the vale, overhanging the green meadows and the dark woods with the dazzling whiteness of its precipices and pinnacles, which are like spires of radiant 158 crystal, covered with a network of frosted silver. These glaciers flow perpetually into the valley, ravaging in their slow but irresistible progress the pastures and the forests which surround them, performing a work of desolation in ages, which a river of lava might accomplish in an hour, but far more irretrievably. For where the ice has once descended, the hardiest plant refuses to grow, if even, as in some extraordinary instances, it should recede after its progress has once commenced. The glaciers perpetually move onward, at the rate of a foot each day, with a motion that commences at the spot where, on the boundaries of perpetual congelation, they are produced by the freezing 159 of the waters, which arise from the partial melting of the eternal snows. They drag with them from the regions whence they derive their origin, all the ruins of the mountain, enormous rocks, and immense accumulations of sand and stones. These are driven onwards by the irresistible stream of solid ice, and when they arrive at a declivity of the mountain, sufficiently rapid, roll down, scattering ruin. I saw one of these rocks which had descended in the spring. Winter here is the season of silence and safety, which measured 40 feet in every direction. The verge of a glacier, like that of Boysen, presents the most vivid image of desolation that it is possible to conceive. 160 no one dares to approach it, for the enormous pinnacles of ice which perpetually fall are perpetually reproduced. The pines of the forest, which bound it at one extremity, are overthrown and shattered to a wide extent at its base. There is something inexpressibly dreadful in the aspect of the few branchless trunks, which, nearest to the ice rifts, still stand in the uprooted soil. The meadows perish, overwhelmed with sand and stones. Within this last year, these glaciers have advanced 300 feet into the valley. Saussure, the naturalist, says that they have their periods of increase and decay. The people of the country hold an opinion entirely different, but as judge more probable. It is agreed by all that the snow on the summit of Mont Blanc and the neighboring mountains perpetually augments, and that ice, in the form of glaciers, subsists without melting in the valley of Chamonix during its transient and variable summer. If the snow which produces this glacier must augment, and the heat of the valley is no obstacle to the perpetual existence of such masses of ice as have already descended into it, the consequence is obvious. The glaciers must augment and will subsist, at least until they have overflowed this vale. I will not pursue Buffon's sublime but gloomy theory that this globe 162, which we inhabit, will at some future period be changed into a mass of frost by the encroachments of the polar ice, and of that produced on the most elevated points of the earth. Do you, who assert the supremacy of Ahriman, imagine him throned among these desolating snows, among these palaces of death and frost, so sculptured in this their terrible magnificence by the adamantine hand of necessity, and that he casts around him, as the first essays of his final usurpation, avalanches, torrents, rocks, and thunders, and above all these deadly glaciers, at once the proof and symbols of his reign. Add to this the degradation of the human species, who in these regions are half 163 deformed or idiotic, and most of whom are deprived of anything that can excite interest or admiration. This is a part of the subject more mournful and less sublime, but such as neither the poet nor the philosopher should disdain to regard. This morning we departed, on the promise of a fine day, to visit the glacier of Montenvert. In that part where it fills a slanting valley, it is called the Sea of Ice. This valley is 950 toises, or 7,600 feet above the level of the sea. We had not proceeded far before the rain began to fall, but we persisted until we had accomplished more than half of our journey, when we returned, wet through. 164 Chamonix, July 25th. We have returned from visiting the glacier of Montenvert, or as it is called, the Sea of Ice, a scene in truth of dizzying wonder. The path that winds to it along the side of a mountain, now clothed with pines, now intersected with snowy hollows, is wide and steep. The cabin of Montenvert is 3 leagues from Chamonix, half of which distance is performed on mules, not so sure-footed, but that on the first day the one which I rode fell in what the guides call a mauvaise pas, so that I narrowly escaped being precipitated down the mountain. We passed over a hollow covered with snow, down which vast stones are accustomed to roll. When 165 had fallen the preceding day, a little time after we had returned, our guides desired us to pass quickly, for it is said that sometimes the least sound will accelerate their descent. We arrived at Montenvert, however, safe. On all sides precipitous mountains, the abodes of unrelenting frost, surround this vale. Their sides are banked up with ice and snow, broken, heaped high, and exhibiting terrific chasms. The summits are sharp and naked pinnacles, whose overhanging steepness will not even permit snow to rest upon them. Lines of dazzling ice occupy here and there their perpendicular rifts, and shine through the driving vapors with inexpressible brilliance. They 166 pierce the clouds like things not belonging to this earth. The vale itself is filled with a mass of undulating ice, and has an ascent sufficiently gradual, even to the remotest abysses of these horrible desarts. It is only half a league, about 2 miles in breadth, and seems much less. It exhibits an appearance as if frost had suddenly bound up the waves and whirlpools of a mighty torrent. We walked some distance upon its surface. The waves are elevated about 12 or 15 feet from the surface of the mass, which is intersected by long gaps of unfathomable depth, the ice of whose sides is more beautifully azure than the sky. In these regions, everything changes and is in motion. This 167 vast mass of ice has one general progress, which ceases neither day nor night. It breaks and bursts forever. Some undulations sink while others rise. It is never the same. The echo of rocks, or of the ice and snow which fall from their overhanging precipices, or roll from their aerial summits, scarcely ceases for one moment. One would think that Mont Blanc, like the god of the Stoics, was a vast animal, and that the frozen blood forever circulated through his stony veins. Montélimar, July 28th. The next morning, we returned through the rain to St. Martin. The scenery had lost something of its immensity, thick clouds hanging over the highest mountains. But visitings of sunset intervened between the showers, and the blue sky shone between the accumulated clouds of snowy whiteness which brought them. The dazzling mountains sometimes glittered through a chasm of the clouds. Above our heads and all the charm of its grandeur remained. We repassed Pont Pellisier, a wooden bridge over the Arve and the ravine of the Arve. We repassed the pine forests which overhang the defile, the chateau of St. Michel, a haunted ruin, built on the edge of a precipice and shadowed over by the eternal forest. We repassed the Vale of Servaz, a vale more beautiful because more luxuriant than that of Chamonix. Mont Blanc forms one of the sides of this vale also, and the other is enclosed by an irregular amphitheater of enormous mountains, one of which is in ruins, and fell 50 years ago into the higher part of the valley. The smoke of its fall was seen in Piedmont, and people went from Turin to investigate whether a volcano had not 170 burst forth among the Alps. It continued falling many days, spreading, with the shock and thunder of its ruin, consternation into the neighboring vales. In the evening we arrived at St. Martin. The next day we wound through the valley, which I have described before, and arrived in the evening at our home. We have bought some specimens of minerals and plants, and 2 or 3 crystal seals, at Mont Blanc, to preserve the remembrance of having approached it. There is a cabinet of Histoire naturelle at Chamonix, just as at Keswick, Matlock, and Clifton, the proprietor of which is the very vilest specimen of that vile species of 171 quack that, together with the whole army of aubergistes and guides, and indeed the entire mass of the population, subsist on the weakness and credulity of travelers as leeches subsist on the sick. The most interesting of my purchases is a large collection of all the seeds of rare alpine plants, with their names written upon the outside of the papers that contain them. These I mean to colonize in my garden in England, and to permit you to make what choice you please from them. They are companions which the celandine, the classic celandine, need not despise. They are as wild and more daring than he, and will tell him tales of things 172, even as touching and sublime as the gaze of a vernal poet. Did I tell you that there are troops of wolves among these mountains? In the winter they descend into the valleys, which the snow occupies 6 months of the year, and devour everything that they can find out of doors. A wolf is more powerful than the fiercest and strongest dog. There are no bears in these regions. We heard, when we were at Lucerne, that they were occasionally found in the forests which surround that lake. Adieu. Nes. Lines written in the Vale of Chamonix. Mont Blanc. Lines written in the Vale of Chamonix. 1. The everlasting universe of things flows through the mind and rolls its rapid waves. Now dark, now glittering, now reflecting gloom. Now lending splendor, where from secret springs the source of human thought its tribute brings. Of waters, with a sound but half its own, such as a feeble brook will oft assume. In the wild woods, among the mountains lone, where waterfalls around it leap forever, where woods and winds contend, and a vast river over its rocks ceaselessly bursts and raves. 176 air. Thus thou, ravine of Arve, dark, deep ravine, thou many-colored, many-voiced vale, over whose pines and crags and caverns sail fast cloud shadows and sunbeams, awful scene, where power in likeness of the Arve comes down from the ice gulfs that gird his secret throne, bursting through these dark mountains like the flame of lightning throw the tempest, thou dost lie, thy giant brood of pines around thee clinging, children of elder time, in whose devotion the chainless winds still come and ever came, to drink their odors and their mighty swinging, to hear an old and solemn harmony. Thine earthly rainbows stretched across the sweep of the ethereal waterfall whose veil robes some unsculptured image, the strange sleep, which when the voices of the dissart far apse all in its own deep eternity. Thy caverns echoing to the Arve's commotion, a loud, lone sound no other sound can tame. Thou art pervaded with that ceaseless motion. Thou art the path of that unresting sound. Dizzy ravine, and when I gaze on thee, I seem as in a trance sublime and strange, to muse on my own separate fantasy. My human mind which passively now renders and receives fast influencings, holding an unremitting interchange with the clear universe of things around. One legion of wild thoughts whose wandering wings now float above thy darkness and now rest, where that or thou art no unbidden guest, in the still cave of the witch poesy, seeking among the shadows that pass by, ghosts of all things that are, some shade of thee, some phantom, some faint image, till the breast from which they fled recalls them, thou art there. 178 EI. Some say that gleams of a remoter world visit the soul in sleep, that death is slumber, and that its shapes the busy thoughts outnumber. Of those who wake and live, I look on high. Has some unknown omnipotence unfurled the veil of life and deaths, or do I lie in dream, and does the mightier world of sleep spread far around and inaccessibly? It circles, for the very spirit fails, driven like a homeless cloud from steep to steep, that vanishes among the viewless gales. Far, far above, piercing the infinite sky, Mont Blanc appears, still, snowy and serene. Its subject mountains their unearthly forms pile around it ice and rock, broad vales between, of frozen floods, unfathomable deeps, blue as the overhanging heaven that spread, and wind among the accumulated steeps. 179, a dissart peopled by the storms alone, save when the eagle brings some hunter's bone, and the wolf tracks her there, how hideously its shapes are heaped around, rude, bare, and high. Ghastly and scarred and riven, is this the scene where the old earthquake Ammon taught her young? Ruin, were these their toys, or did a sea of fire envelope once this silent snow? None can reply, all seems eternal now. The wilderness has a mysterious tongue, which teaches awful doubt or faith so mild, so solemn, so serene, that man may be but for such faith with nature reconciled. Thou hast a voice, great mountain, to repeal large codes of fraud and woe, not understood by all but which the wise and great and good interpret or make felt or deeply feel. 4. The fields, the lakes, the forests, and the streams, ocean, and all the living things that dwell within the Dal earth, lightning and rain, earthquake and fiery flood and hurricane, the torpor of the year when feeble dreams visit the hidden buds or dreamless sleep, holds every future leaf and flower, the bound with which from that detested trance they leap. The works and ways of man, their death and birth, and that of him, and all that his may be. All things that move and breathe with toil and sound, are born and die, revolve, subside, and swell. Power dwells apart in its tranquility, remote, serene, and inaccessible. And this, the naked countenance of earth, on which I gaze, even these primeval mountains, teach the adverting mind, the glaciers creep, like snakes that watch their prey from their far fountains. Slow rolling on, there many a precipice. Frost and the sun in scorn of mortal power have piled dome, pyramid, and pinnacle. A city of death, distinct with many a tower. 181, and wall impregnable of beaming ice. Yet not a city, but a flood of ruin. Is there, that from the boundaries of the sky rolls its perpetual stream, vast pines are strewing its destined path, or in the mangled soil. Branchless and shattered stand, the rocks drawn down. From yon remotest waste have overthrown the limits of the dead and living world. Never to be reclaimed, the dwelling place of insects, beasts, and birds becomes its spoil. Their food and their retreat forever gone. So much of life and joy is lost, the race of man flies far in dread, his work and dwelling vanish like smoke before the tempest stream. And their place is not known, below vast caves shine in the rushing torrent's restless gleam, which from those secret chasms in tumult welling meet in the vale and one majestic river, the breath and blood of distant lands forever. 182 rolls its loud waters to the ocean waves, breathes its swift vapors to the circling air. 5. Mont Blanc yet gleams on high, the power is there. The still and solemn power of many sights, and many sounds, and much of life and death. In the calm darkness of the moonless nights, in the lone glare of day, the snows descend. Upon that mountain, none beholds them there, nor when the flakes burn in the sinking sun, or the starbeams dart through them, winds contend silently there and heap the snow with breath. Rapid and strong but silently, its home. The voiceless lightning in these solitudes keeps innocently and like vapor broods over the snow, the secret strength of things, which governs thought and to the infinite dome of heaven is as a law, inhabits thee. 183 And what wert thou, and earth and stars and sea, if to the human mind's imaginings silence and solitude were vacancy? June 23, 1816. Raynell, Printer, 45 Broad Street, Golden Square,